Captain Leon Drake stepped off the transport shuttle with a grunt, his boots making a dull thud against the cracked obsidian surface of Xyloth. The planet's twin moons loomed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the jagged landscape. As he surveyed the barren wasteland, Leon couldn't help but wonder what had drawn Earth's diplomats to broker a peace treaty with these people. If this place was a representation of their civilization, he was skeptical about any form of agreement being made here. "Welcome to the pristine beauty of Xyloth," a voice said dryly, breaking his musings. Leon turned to see his liaison, Lieutenant Thera, a short-haired, pragmatic woman who was almost always right in the middle of the action, usually carrying a heavy arsenal of sarcasm. "I'll admit, not exactly what I imagined when I signed up for this mission," Leon said, adjusting his visor. The dust kicked up by the wind didn't help his mood. "I was expecting something a little less desolate. Did I miss the memo on the tropical resorts?" Thera shrugged with a grin, leading the way. "You think this is bad? You should have seen the first settlement they built here. Trust me, Captain, it was less than 5-star. They walked across the uneven ground, Leon's equipment clinking lightly with each step. His mission was simple: negotiate with the alien species that ruled this planet, a people who called themselves the Bellans. Peace. It sounded easy enough. But even before meeting their queen, Xylaria, Leon had learned that these beings were proud, deeply rooted in their traditions, and perhaps more than a little hostile. The entrance to the palace, if you could call it that, wasn't much more than a grand opening in the side of a mountain. The Bellans' architectural style reflected their utilitarian nature, sleek, functional, and a little imposing. With its towering walls of dark stone and bioluminescent markings along the edges, the structure almost looked as though it had been carved from the bones of the planet itself. "So, any idea what our queen is like?" Leon asked, adjusting the collar of his uniform. He tried to picture a regal alien queen, but with the little intel they had gathered, there wasn't much to go on. Thera chuckled. "The queen's the least of your worries. It's the council that's a pain. If they don't like your face, they'll ship you straight back to Earth with a stern lecture about intergalactic diplomacy." Leon grimaced. "And how exactly does one get a face that the Bellans will like?" "I wouldn't worry about it," Thera replied, her tone filled with mock sympathy. "Your charm will definitely win them over. You know, your rugged good looks." They were greeted at the grand doorway by 2 Bellan guards. Their tall, lithe bodies were covered in armor-like skins, and their eyes glowed faintly under their long, pointed ears. Leon did his best to ignore the intensity of their stares as they led him and Thera inside. The throne room was unlike any place Leon had ever seen. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the soft, flickering light of bioluminescent flora hanging from the high ceilings. The throne itself, an imposing structure of sculpted metal and stone, sat at the far end of the room, and there, seated upon it, was Xylaria. She was striking, to say the least. Her long, silvery hair cascaded over her shoulders, the strands alive with faint sparks of light. Her skin, a deep, almost metallic shade of lavender, shimmered in the dim light. Her eyes, dark as the cosmos, scanned Leon with a sharp intensity. Her long, pointed ears twitched as she observed him, every movement calculated. Leon found himself a little taken aback, but he kept his posture confident, forcing himself to appear unbothered. "Captain Leon Drake," Xylaria's voice was rich and deep, vibrating through the room with a quiet power. "The human who would negotiate peace with us. Tell me, human, do you think you can succeed where so many before you have failed?" Leon blinked, momentarily thrown off by her directness. "I don't plan on failing, Your Majesty," he said smoothly, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here to make this work no matter how unconventional things may get." Thera stifled a laugh behind him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Leon ignored her. He knew how this was going to play out. Xylaria's reputation as a ruler was fearsome, and from the way she sat with an almost bored expression, He could tell she wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "And what makes you think I will listen to you, human?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she tilted her head. Leon decided to take the risk, offering the simplest of gestures. He smiled. It wasn't a forced grin or one filled with empty compliments. It was a warm, genuine smile, the kind that was meant to convey sincerity, even if he wasn't sure how it would be received. Zalaria stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the reaction Leon had expected, but then again, he didn't think he was supposed to expect anything. He watched as her long, pointed ears twitched again, but this time not in irritation. "You smile like a fool," she remarked, though there was a slight shift in her voice, almost like a curiosity mixed with a touch of amusement. "I know, it's a human thing," Leon replied. "We tend to smile when things get awkward, and considering we're both standing in a room filled with people who probably wish they were anywhere else, I figured I'd at least try to lighten the mood." Zalaria's eyes flickered with something unexpected, amusement perhaps. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms across her chest as she studied him. "You think you can negotiate peace with a smile?" Leon chuckled, not missing a beat. "I'd like to think it's a little more complicated than that. But if we start with something simple, maybe we can find common ground." Zalaria seemed to soften, just the tiniest bit. She uncrossed her arms, and her posture, though still regal and commanding, became less rigid. "You have courage, human, and a strange sense of humor which I do not understand, but—" She paused, as if testing the weight of her words. "It is refreshing." Leon's grin widened. "I'll take that as a compliment, Your Majesty." Thera, who had been silently observing, was no longer able to suppress her laughter. "Well, Captain, looks like you're not totally useless after all." Zalaria shot her a sharp glance, but there was no malice in it. "Do not mistake my hospitality for kindness, Lieutenant. I will be watching you both closely." Leon gave her a mock salute. "Understood, Your Majesty. Just don't expect me to stop smiling." As the Belen Queen's eyes lingered on him, Leon couldn't help but feel that despite the strange and difficult situation, something was changing. He didn't know yet what the outcome would be. But there was something in Zalaria's gaze, in the way her long ears flicked slightly in his direction, that made him think maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as impossible as it seemed. And for the first time since he arrived, he allowed himself to hope. The following days blurred into one long stretch of uneasy meetings, occasional awkward pauses, and negotiations that felt more like intellectual tennis than diplomatic discourse. Leon had thought he was prepared for anything. After all, he'd been trained in the harshest conditions Earth had to offer, from riot zones to asteroid mining colonies. But this was different. The alien queen, Zalaria, was something else entirely. Despite her cold demeanor and the distance she kept, Leon had a feeling that she was watching him more closely than she let on. Every time he cracked a joke, usually involving an outdated Earth reference or some obscure piece of human trivia, she would glance at him, her long, pointed ears twitching in ways that suggested both confusion and curiosity. At first, Leon wasn't sure if she was amused or just thoroughly annoyed by him. But as the days wore on, he noticed something shifting beneath her composed exterior. Her responses became more nuanced. One afternoon, during a particularly tense negotiation session, Zalaria broke her silence after Leon suggested a rather outlandish peace proposal involving the exchange of resources for a rather comical human tradition. "So let me get this straight," Zalaria said, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "You propose that we trade our valuable mineral resources in exchange for your tacos. What is this, taco?" Leon leaned back in his chair, flashing her one of his signature smiles. "Tacos are a food. It's sort of a culinary masterpiece. Think of it as a cultural exchange. You give us some of your precious resources, and we offer you the gift of a crunchy shell filled with a variety of ingredients." Zalaria blinked slowly, her long ears flicking in rapid succession as if she was trying to process the information. "A shell filled with food," she asked, her tone flat. "You humans are strange." Leon chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment, but seriously, tacos are a big deal. They're like the human equivalent of an art form. You can't understand Earth until you've tried one." Zalaria's expression remained impassive, but the slight arch of her brow was enough to tell Leon that he had caught her interest. "I will not be swayed by your art form, human," she said, though the corners of her lips twitched upward ever so slightly. "But I will admit you have a peculiar charm. It is unexpected." "Hey, don't knock it till you try it," Leon said with a grin. "If you're not careful, I'll have you hooked on tacos by the end of this mission." Thera, who had been standing quietly in the background, raised an eyebrow. "I'll be sure to let the Council know that Earth's peace negotiations are now based on the culinary arts." Leon smirked. "It's a winning strategy, you'll see." Despite the playful banter, Leon knew that the negotiations were far from settled. Zalaria's people, the Bellans, had their own intricacies when it came to diplomacy, and humor didn't seem to be something they appreciated in the way humans did. But Leon had learned something in his years of military service. Sometimes the most serious situations could be softened with just a bit of levity, and with Zalaria, it seemed to be working, at least a little. That evening, after the meeting, Leon found himself wandering the palace halls. The towering stone walls loomed over him, but the silence was surprisingly calming. He had expected to be locked in his quarters, alone with nothing but the weight of the peace talks, but instead, he was granted freedom to roam the grounds. As he turned a corner, he came face to face with Zalaria herself. She was standing near a large, open window that overlooked the vast, desolate plains below. Her back was straight, and the way she held herself made it clear that she was still the queen of this world, despite the strange air of vulnerability that had begun to seep into their interactions. "Captain Drake," she said without turning around, her voice as cold as ever, "I see you have a penchant for wandering." "I'm just trying to get a feel for the place," Leon replied, leaning against the doorframe. "It's impressive in its own way, a lot of history here." "You will not find answers in the stone, human," she said, finally turning to face him. "The answers are in the negotiations, the resources, the power." Leon raised an eyebrow. "Power, huh? Is that what it's all about for you, Zalaria? The resources, the throne, the control?" Her eyes flashed, and for a moment Leon thought he might have pushed too far. But instead of the harsh reprimand he was expecting, she simply stared at him, her long ears flicking back. "Do you not understand, human?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "For my people, beauty and power are one and the same. If I were to appear weak, if I were to show any flaw, any imperfection, it would be seen as a weakness. And in our culture, weakness is not tolerated." Leon's gaze softened. "You think you're weak because of how you look." Zalaria's eyes narrowed, but her posture softened. "I am the queen of the Bellans. My appearance must reflect that power. The sharper my features, the more regal my stature, the more I will be revered. It is tradition." Leon's brow furrowed as he processed what she was saying. "But that's just a standard, a system. It doesn't define who you are, Zalaria. You're not just your appearance. I see strength in you. I see a queen who's willing to make peace even when it's hard. That counts for something." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Zalaria's eyes met his, and for the first time since their initial meeting, Leon saw something different in her gaze. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps, or maybe, just maybe, a crack in the armor she had so carefully constructed. "I do not need your flattery, human," she said sharply, but there was no conviction behind her words. "I simply need results." Leon nodded, smiling again. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to talk about tacos or anything else, let me know. I'm a pretty good listener." Zalaria's eyes twitched again, but this time it wasn't annoyance. It was something else. Amusement, curiosity. "I will consider your offer," she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "But do not mistake me, Captain. I am not one for frivolity." Leon's grin widened. Well, I'm not exactly known for being serious either. As he walked away, he couldn't help but feel that something had changed. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, the walls between them felt a little thinner. Maybe the tacos would work after all. The following day, the sun of Xyloth hung low in the sky, casting an orange haze over the jagged peaks of the mountains. Leon had been invited to the royal gardens, an odd place for a soldier to be summoned. The invitation had come not through the usual channels of communication, but via a personal request from Xylaria herself. He couldn't shake the feeling that this invitation wasn't just about formalities. No, there was something different about this. He was met at the entrance of the garden by an attendant, an alien whose pale blue skin and iridescent, insect-like wings made Leon momentarily wonder if the Bellans had a penchant for creating bizarre hybrids for their servants. The attendant didn't speak, only gestured for Leon to follow. He could tell right away this wasn't the kind of garden with roses and hedges. No, the flora of Xyloth was as alien as the people who cultivated it. The paths twisted and turned, lined with plants that seemed to hum and glow faintly in the twilight. Some of the trees appeared to have translucent bark, their roots glowing with bioluminescence, while others were shaped like delicate glass sculptures that seemed to shiver with the wind. There were no flowers as Leon knew them, only complex, organic formations that pulsed and shifted like living art. Leon was caught between fascination and confusion, but he kept moving, following the attendant who remained silent, like a statue. Eventually, they arrived at a small clearing where Xylaria stood waiting. Her figure was outlined against the strange, shifting colors of the garden, her long silver hair fluttering lightly in the breeze. As always, her posture was impeccable, regal even, but there was something less distant about her today, something more human. "Captain Drake," she greeted him, her voice low and controlled. "Thank you for coming. I needed to speak with you in private, away from the formalities." Leon raised an eyebrow but said nothing, merely offering her a polite nod. "Anything I can help with, Your Majesty." His tone was teasing, but he held his posture steady, ever aware that he was treading carefully with her. Xylaria motioned to a nearby bench made of dark, smooth stone. The bench looked almost like it had grown naturally out of the ground, as if it were part of the landscape. She took a seat, folding her legs gracefully beneath her, her eyes searching the sky for a moment before turning back to Leon. "I have been thinking," she said slowly, her voice filled with a rare hesitation, "about your words and your smile. You claim that I am not defined by the expectations of my people, but how can I be anything but? I was born to be queen. And that means I must uphold their standards, standards that have been ingrained in us for generations." Leon sat beside her, his movements casual. "We humans have a similar problem with standards. Some of us think we need to be a certain way to be accepted. But honestly, I don't think it's about the appearance, Xylaria. It's about who you are on the inside." Xylaria's lips tightened. Xylaria blinked, clearly thrown off by his bluntness. "You have no respect for our ways, human." "No," Leon replied with a shrug. "I have respect for you, but these old traditions, they're holding you back. You're more than just how you look. You're a queen who's willing to make peace, even when it's hard. I don't know about you, but that takes a lot more strength than anything a beauty standard could demand." Xylaria shifted uncomfortably, but instead of snapping at him, she fell silent. It was then that Leon saw it, the tiniest crack in her armor. Her long ears drooped slightly, and the sharp edge to her expression softened for just a moment. "You speak as if you understand me, human," she said softly. "But you do not, you cannot." Leon let the silence hang between them for a few seconds before leaning back slightly. "Actually, I do get it. It's like being judged for not having the right sense of humor. People expect you to be funny in a certain way, and if you don't meet that expectation, well, you're just not funny by their standards." Xylaria's gaze flickered. "That is a strange analogy." Leon chuckled. "I'm full of them." He flashed her one of his trademark smiles, but this time it wasn't as light-hearted. There was something deeper behind it, Look, I'm not here to change your people's traditions. But I think you've got something they're missing, yourself. You're not bound to be what they want you to be. You're more than that. You're a leader because of your mind, your decisions, not because of how you look. Her long ears twitched again and she stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Perhaps, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Leon, sensing an opening, decided to push a little further. You know, I've been thinking about those tacos again. Maybe I could bring you some. I mean, if you're curious enough to try them, I could arrange a small gathering. Just you and a few of my finest taco creations. Zelaria shot him a look that could have frozen the entire garden, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something close to amusement, or at least curiosity. You are relentless, Captain. Leon leaned in with a grin. I prefer the term charmingly persistent. For a long moment, Zelaria said nothing, but Leon could sense that something inside her was changing. Whether it was his persistence or something deeper, he wasn't sure. But this wasn't about tacos anymore. It was about trust and about seeing each other as equals in a world that demanded more than appearances could ever offer. I suppose, Zelaria said finally, breaking the silence, there is merit in seeing things differently. But that does not change the reality of what my people expect. Maybe not, Leon replied, standing up from the bench. But that doesn't mean you have to live up to their expectations. You can still be a great queen without being what they want, just like I don't need to be what Earth wants me to be. Zelaria stood as well, her posture regal as always. But there was something in her eyes now, a crack in the armor, a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. I will think about it, she said simply. Leon gave a playful salute. Take your time, no rush. But when you're ready, tacos are on the menu. Zelaria tilted her head, her long ears catching the light in a way that made her appear almost human for a fleeting moment. You truly believe that tacos can change the course of history, don't you? Leon laughed, his tone easy and genuine. You'd be surprised. Give them a try, and you might just be the one to change the history books. Imagine the headline. Belen Queen brings peace to the galaxy, one taco at a time. She didn't laugh, but Leon saw the hint of something behind her eyes, a curiosity, an interest in this absurd human ritual. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As they walked back to the palace, the air between them was lighter, less burdened by unspoken expectations. And Leon knew, deep down, that he wasn't just changing the way Zelaria viewed him. He was slowly helping her change the way she viewed herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they needed to begin bridging the impossible gap between their worlds. The days that followed felt like a slow, deliberate unraveling of the tension between Leon and Zelaria. The atmosphere in the palace shifted, becoming less formal and rigid with each passing conversation. Where once there had been barriers, now there were only the faintest hints of curiosity. Leon knew better than to push too hard. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, but there was something about this alien queen that intrigued him. She wasn't like the others he had met in his line of work, those who saw everything as a transaction, a calculation of power. Zelaria didn't seem to care about winning every negotiation. Instead, it was clear that there was something else at play beneath her commanding exterior, something he was beginning to understand, even if it wasn't fully formed yet. It was another day in the gardens when Zelaria sent for him again. The royal messenger arrived in the usual fashion, silently, without ceremony, and handed Leon a thin, silver tablet with a single line of text. Join the queen in the observatory. Your presence is requested. Leon had been to the observatory before, but it wasn't a place for casual visitors. It was a place of science, of knowledge, and of observation, literally. It was the Belen's technological marvel, a circular dome suspended high above the palace grounds. Inside, the vast expanse of space could be seen in its full glory. Distant stars, swirling nebulae, and the haunting vastness of the universe spread out in every direction. When Leon arrived, Zelaria was already there, staring out at the endless expanse. Her silver hair gleamed in the dim, ambient light that bathed the observatory, and her posture was uncharacteristically relaxed. There were no advisors around, no formalities, just the two of them and the infinite void. "You came," Zalaria said, turning slightly but not quite looking at him. Her voice was softer than usual, as if she were contemplating something far beyond his comprehension. Leon gave a casual shrug, his hands in his pockets. "Well, you did send for me. Figured I should show up. Plus, who am I to turn down a view like this?" He motioned to the cosmos outside, trying to make light of the situation. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but he didn't want it to feel too heavy. Zalaria didn't respond immediately. She continued to gaze into the stars, her long ears flicking in the quiet. There was a moment of silence between them, the kind of silence that felt more intimate than it probably should have. Finally, she spoke again. "I have been thinking about what you said, the tacos. About strength, about beauty, about what I must be. My people do not believe in such things, Captain. To them, beauty is power, and I have always struggled to fit into that mold. I am told I must be perfect, as all queens should be, but I am not perfect." Leon looked at her, leaning against the doorframe. He knew that this was a delicate moment, one that required the right response, but he wasn't going to play the game her people expected. This wasn't about beauty standards. It never was. "Zalaria, you don't have to be perfect," he said, his voice steady. "You've been told your whole life that you need to be something you're not, and that's not fair. You're already strong. You've proven that every day. You're a queen not because of how you look, but because of what you do, what you want to do." Her gaze flicked to him, her expression unreadable. But there was a shift in the air, a softness in her eyes that Leon hadn't seen before. The subtle armor that had once surrounded her seemed to be cracking piece by piece. "I have to be more than that," she said, her tone almost bitter now. "I was born to lead, Captain, not to play at being someone else. If I were to step down from the throne, I would lose everything. My people would never accept me as anything but a failure." Leon took a step forward, not quite approaching her but closing the distance between them. "So you think being true to yourself means failure? Zalaria, don't you get it? You've already succeeded. You're here making peace happen. You're doing something no one thought possible. You're changing everything just by being yourself." She looked at him, her eyes lingering on his face for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she sighed. "You speak with such conviction, human. But I fear you do not understand the consequences of my actions. To lead the Bellends is to live by their laws. If I do not embody the ideals they have set, I will be no better than the enemy we are supposed to fight." Leon's lips curled into a small, knowing grin. "Is that what you really believe? Or is that just what you've been told your entire life?" For a second, Zalaria's face faltered. She seemed to hesitate, as though the words had struck a chord. But then, just as quickly, she recovered her composure. "This is not some petty human philosophy, Captain. It is my reality, and that is something you could never understand." "Maybe," Leon said, pushing himself off the doorframe. "But it's also possible that you're not seeing the bigger picture." Zalaria narrowed her eyes slightly, clearly skeptical. "What do you mean?" Leon took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "What I'm saying is that, by focusing on what everyone else thinks of you, you're losing sight of what you want. You're letting your people define your worth. But you don't have to live like that. There's no law that says a queen can't change. Maybe you don't have to abandon your crown, but you do have to abandon the idea that perfection is the price of leadership." He watched her carefully, seeing the struggle in her eyes. There was a long silence, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw a flicker of something in her. Uncertainty, yes, but also the first hint of acceptance. "That's easy for you to say," she said, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. "You're not bound by expectations. You can afford to make mistakes." Leon chuckled, the humor in his voice light. "Believe me, I make plenty of mistakes. You should have seen me trying to navigate a foreign market in one of the colonies once. I managed to convince a vendor that Earth's most famous currency, was a packet of chewing gum. Zalaria's lips twitched slightly at the corners, and Leon caught the briefest flash of amusement in her eyes. She didn't laugh, but her expression softened. "I'll take your word for it," she said, her tone just a little less distant than before. Leon smiled, his voice gentle. "Zalaria, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be true to yourself. And when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do." For a long time she didn't speak, but when she finally did, her voice was steadier, more thoughtful. Perhaps I have been too rigid, too focused on perfection, but it is difficult to break free from what I've always known. Leon's smile widened, a playful glint in his eyes. "Well, you've got one heck of a starting point. After all, the Queen of Tacos has to be a pretty open-minded leader, don't you think?" Zalaria's eyes widened, and this time she didn't bother to hide the hint of a smile. "You truly are relentless, human." Leon shrugged casually. "What can I say? It's a gift." They stood there for a moment, the quiet stretching between them, until Zalaria finally spoke again, her voice just a bit warmer than before. Maybe I'll give these tacos a chance after all." Leon's grin could have rivaled the sun itself. Now that's the spirit. The day of the final peace negotiations had arrived. The galaxy held its breath as two vastly different civilizations, Earth's coalition and the Belen Empire, stood on the edge of an agreement that could change everything. The diplomats had done their part, the strategists had made their calculations, and now it was time for Captain Leon Drake and Queen Zalaria to seal the deal. Leon stood at the entrance to the palace's great hall, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. This wasn't just about a peace treaty anymore. It wasn't about politics, resources, or military alliances. It was about something far more personal. It was about showing Zalaria that she didn't have to live up to a set of expectations that weren't her own. And more than that, it was about showing both of their worlds that leadership didn't come from perfection. It came from understanding, from change, and from a willingness to break free from the past. Thera, standing next to him, clapped him on the shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this? No backing out now, Drake." "I don't know if I'm ready," Leon said with a smile, "but I'm definitely not backing out. This is bigger than me. It's about her." The doors to the grand hall opened, and they were ushered inside. The room was filled with dignitaries from both sides, the atmosphere thick with the tension of 1,000 negotiations. Zalaria stood at the far end of the room, flanked by her council members. She looked every bit the queen, tall, regal, composed, but something was different about her today. Her usual sharp expression had softened, the lines of stress around her eyes replaced by a quiet determination. Her long ears, once twitching with anxiety, stood still, almost like she was waiting for something. When their eyes met, Leon offered her a small, reassuring smile. It wasn't the smile of a soldier preparing for battle. It was the smile of someone who had seen the cracks in her walls, who had watched her change over the course of these negotiations. Zalaria gave him the faintest nod, and for the first time he saw a true glimmer of gratitude in her gaze. Not for the peace she was about to sign, but for something deeper. For the understanding, the recognition that she didn't have to conform to an ideal of beauty or perfection to be respected and loved. She could be her own person, in all her strength and imperfection. Leon and Zalaria made their way to the central podium, where the documents were laid out. Both sides of the agreement were represented, ready to sign. There was a palpable hush in the room as everyone's attention focused on the two leaders, and in that silence, Leon realized something profound. The moment wasn't about what they were about to sign, it was about what they had already achieved. Zalaria cleared her throat and her voice rang out clear and commanding. "Today, we do not merely sign a treaty. We mark the beginning of a new era, not just for the Belen Empire but for the entire galaxy. We move forward, not as adversaries but as partners. And in this new partnership, we will leave behind the old prejudices, the old ways that kept us apart. We will embrace change." The room was silent for a moment before the murmurs of agreement began to spread. Leon caught Thera's eye from across the room, and she gave him a quick thumbs up. She had always been skeptical about the outcome, but now it seemed that even she was beginning to see the fruits of their efforts. When Zalaria turned to Leon, there was something new in her eyes, a quiet respect, even affection. She held out her hand, and for the first time since their first meeting, Leon could feel the weight of history in that simple gesture. He took her hand firmly, his gaze steady. They were both leaders now, but they were also something more. Two individuals who had learned to see each other for who they truly were. "I never thought I'd say this," Zalaria said quietly, her voice only for him, "but I think I've learned more from you than I ever imagined." Leon chuckled. "Tacos will do that to you." She raised an eyebrow. "I still don't understand how something so simple can have such an effect." "It's not the tacos themselves," Leon replied with a grin. "It's the willingness to try something new, to break the old habits. You've done that, and look where we are." Zalaria nodded slowly, her long ears flicking in acknowledgement. "I suppose it's time to put aside the idea that perfection is the only path forward. And to make room for something real," Leon added. With a shared glance, they turned to the audience, and without another word, they signed the treaty. The moment the ink hit the paper, a wave of relief swept through the room. The room erupted into applause, some genuine, some perhaps more out of necessity. But for Leon and Zalaria, it was a moment of quiet triumph. After the signing, as the dignitaries mingled and exchanged pleasantries, Leon found himself standing off to the side, watching the scene unfold. He was surprised when Zalaria approached him, not with the cold formality of their earlier meetings, but with something more, something human. "You were right," she said softly, standing beside him, her eyes scanning the room. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, about seeing the truth in others." Leon smiled. "I'm just glad you saw it, and I'm even more glad that you're taking the first step." "I never thought I would," she said, her voice almost wistful. "But you were right. I don't need to be perfect, I need to be true." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, each processing the enormity of what had just transpired. But beneath it all, there was an understanding between them that had never existed before. An understanding born not from politics or treaties, but from the simple, human connection that had grown between them. "Well," Leon said after a while, breaking the silence with his characteristic grin, "how about those tacos? I'm thinking we could make it a tradition. You know, a diplomatic summit, tacos, peace talks, the whole package." Zalaria couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "Perhaps not for every occasion, Captain, but maybe once in a while, for old time's sake." Leon chuckled. "I'll take that." As the evening wore on, the room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the quiet hum of a galaxy on the brink of a new future. For Leon, it wasn't about the peace treaty or the grandeur of the occasion. It was about something more, about how far he and Zalaria had come from their first meeting, from the queen who had doubted her own worth, and the soldier who had just wanted to make a difference. And in the end, it wasn't the war that had been won, nor the peace that had been brokered. It was the simple truth that sometimes the most profound change happens not through force or diplomacy, but through the quiet power of being seen, of being understood. "Here's to new beginnings," Leon said, lifting his glass. Zalaria raised hers to meet his. "And to tacos," she added with a small, amused smile. "And to tacos," Leon agreed, feeling for the first time in a long while that the galaxy might just be a little bit more manageable after all.